Hello. Welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. My name is Shanta, and I'm back with another Candle Crime Time, and today we will be discussing the case of Tamika Huston. If you're not familiar with my channel, what we do here is we tell the stories of those who may have faded away from memory or who hasn't gotten the mainstream coverage that they deserved to have, or just tell the story for the first time if you've never heard it, but also remember the victims. That is the main thing that I want to stress here, is we are always remembering the victim, which is why I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the information that I can find, talking about their childhood, their upbringing, their personality, their family, because these victims are real people, these are real stories, and these are real families that went through this tragedy. So without further ado, let's get started. Of course, you know I had to put on my gloves because, again, candle making can be very messy. And like in the previous video, I'm going to begin the story while I wait for the candles to solidify, as you can see here. Tamika Antoinette Huston was born on December 11th, 1979 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Her mother's name is Gabriella Semenehay. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her last name. And her father's name is Anthony Huston. Tamika had some siblings. She had an older stepbrother named Shaquan, a younger brother named Anthony Jr., and a younger sister named Antonia. Growing up, Tamika was described as having a warm and welcoming personality with a bright, beautiful smile that she drew everyone in. It was easy for her to make friends, and everyone just enjoyed and loved to be around Tamika. It was stated that when Tamika was born, everyone just wanted to be with Tamika, to hold Tamika, and if you had Tamika, you were the most popular person in the room or around at that time. After Tamika graduated high school, she decided to move out, got her own place, and secured a job as a server at a local restaurant. Once she settled into her new home, it wasn't long before she adopted a dog named Macy because of her love for animals. Tamika came from a church-going family and she enjoyed singing, and so that love for singing got her to join the church choir. And she was described as having a beautiful voice. Because of Tamika's love for singing, she had aspirations to become a professional singer. So in 2003, she decided to audition for the popular singing competition show American Idol. However, she did not make it past the first round, which of course was very upsetting for her, as this is something that she had dreamed of doing. After this experience, she felt that the music industry was just going to be a long, incredulous journey. So she decided to go back to school to pursue nursing. According to her aunt, Rebecca Howard, Tamika just had that type of personality where she would just get up and go. She was a very spontaneous individual, just full of life, and she was known for just being here and then being there. So fast forward to May of 2004, Tamika was nearing the end of her spring semester. Because of Tamika's spontaneous personality, it wasn't unusual for her family to sometimes go a day or two or even a few days without hearing from her. However, her aunt Rebecca had started to grow concerned when Tamika would not return her mother Gabriella's phone calls. As I just previously stated, initially it wasn't too concerning because, again, there would be some times where Tamika would go a day or two without returning phone calls, but they would eventually hear from her. But this particular situation was different because she wasn't returning calls at all, and it had actually been a couple of weeks since Gabriella had last heard from Tamika. So after gathering this information of the time frame since Gabriella had heard from Tamika, Rebecca decided to contact the Spartanburg Police Department. And the police decided that they would do a wellness check after hearing Rebecca voice her concerns about Tamika's whereabouts. When the police arrived to Tamika's home, they noticed that her car, a black 1991 Honda CRX, was missing. They noticed that her front door was locked, but during an external search of the perimeter, they found that a window was actually unlocked, so they received permission to enter her home. The police entered Tamika's home. They didn't see any signs of a struggle or anything in too much disarray. However, they did notice that there was an uncashed paycheck left on the counter. They also noticed a horrible odor emanating from the home. So, after a further inspection of the home, they stumbled upon a room where they ended up finding Macy, Tamika's dog, with a litter of puppies that she had given birth to, and it was clear that they had been struggling to survive on their own. The police reported the findings to Tamika's family, which of course set off alarm bells for them because Tamika would never leave Macy behind or leave Macy in the state that she was found in. After this, an APB or a BOLO was put out for Tamika and her car. And Tamika's family decided to beat the pavement, giving out missing flyers, posting that bore her picture, and of course her statistics. They also reached out to the local news to get traction on Tamika's disappearance. While the family was doing that, investigators were looking into Tamika's records to see if they could find any clues or indication of where she may have gone. However, they found that there were no activities on her cards or anything which coincided around last time Tamika was heard from. Of course, the investigators initially believed that Tamika was just a runaway adult due to her spontaneous personality. She may have taken a trip with friends. She may have ran off with a lover of hers and just didn't want to be bothered. So they assumed that her disappearance wasn't too alarming for them. However, Tamika's family didn't buy this, and they ended up giving the police the name of someone that they should look into for answers. And that was Tamika's ex, Terrence Moss, whom Tamika had just recently gone through a horrible breakup with. During a background check into Terrence, investigators found that he did have a criminal history, and in this criminal history included a domestic violence incident that he had with Tamika. This domestic violence charge stems from an argument that Tamika and Terrence had due to his infidelities and philandering ways. During this argument, he ended up punching Tamika in her face. And after that, Tamika told him to kick rocks, get out, and she filed the charges against him. Terrence was due in court on the domestic violence charges just a week after Tamika went missing, providing them with a possible motive into Tamika's disappearance. On June 23, 2004, Terrence voluntarily entered the police station to speak with investigators. During his interview, Terrence gave the background into how he knew Tamika and about how long that they dealt with each other. He said that they met in May of 2000 and that they lived together until March of 2004. Police told Terrence during his questioning that they knew what happened between him and Tamika, the domestic violence charges, and he admitted to punching Tamika in her face during the argument that they had about his creeping, sneaking, freaking ways. After his questioning, Terrence became a person of interest. However, the police didn't really have anything to hold him on, so they let him go. After this, investigators did not give up looking for Tamika. They searched accident reports, hospital records, and even the mortuary to see if any records would show any inclination on where Tamika was. During the investigation, investigators came across some distressing news. In June 2004, someone had called to report a murdered woman's body had been found in the Cleveland Park Lake. And this was around the same time that Tamika went missing. So detectives went out to search the lake, and they used scuba divers, they used cadaver dogs for the surrounding area, but the search was called off when they could not locate a body. This was not particularly upsetting for the investigators because this provided hope that Tamika could possibly still be saved. Meanwhile, Tamika's family wanted to keep the public informed on her and her story, and they even offered a $50,000 reward for any useful information that resulted in finding Tamika. While the local news reported on Tamika's disappearance, the mainstream media never reported on her disappearance. Her story was overlooked by the likes of other women or teenagers that went missing around the same time that Tamika went missing. Those like Lacey Peterson, Lori Hacking, and even Natalie Holloway. This particular revelation, of course, frustrated the hell out of Tamika's family, and understandably so. And Tamika's case even helped spark the conversation for the missing white woman syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, that just refers to the mainstream media's obsession, if you will, or sense of urgency to discuss and report on the disappearance of white women over women of color. In July of 2004, after seeing Tamika's story again, a woman called the investigators to report that she may have seen Tamika's vehicle. And she may have seen Tamika's vehicle in the Barksdale Apartments, which is not far from where she lived. So, after receiving this tip, investigators and the forensics team raced to the Barksdale Apartments where they located the car that was reported by the woman to the investigators. After verifying the tag number and the registration, the car was confirmed to be that of Tamika's. However, investigators wondered, did Tamika leave the car there or did someone else abandon the car? The forensics team combed through the entire car, and the only pieces of evidence that they recovered was a partial print on the steering wheel, and underneath the passenger seat, they found a set of keys. Barksdale apartment residents were interviewed to see if they may have any information on the car being left in the apartment complex parking lot. One witness stated that he saw one black man park the car and walk away from it, but then another witness stated that they saw two black men with the car, park the car, and then abandon it. The only strong evidence at this point that the investigators had was the partial print and the set of keys. So with the partial print, they entered the print into IAFIS, which stands for Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. However, there were no matches with this print, and this helped eliminate Torrance as a suspect. Next, the investigators tried to see if the keys maybe have belonged to Tamika or the person or persons who were responsible for her disappearance. So they went to all of Tamika's known locations, including her home, to see if the keys were to work to any door anywhere, and it did not. This led to investigators to believe that these keys belonged to whomever was involved with Tamika's disappearance. The next thing investigators did was take the keys to a locksmith to see if the locksmith could provide any information on the key whatsoever. And it turns out that the locksmith immediately identified the keys. He stated that the keys belonged to the Fremont School Apartments, which was a old elementary school turned into a public housing. So investigators went to the Fremont School Apartments, where they found that the apartment complex had 46 apartments. So they began the work to see which apartment the keys belonged to. They went one by one, checking each door of the apartment complex with the key, however, finding no success. That is, until they checked the final door, which was in the basement of the apartment complex, and it worked. However, the apartment was abandoned, and this was apparently due to severe flooding in the apartment. However, with the little bit of things that were left in the apartment, they ended up collecting that as evidence to see what they could process and get from it. Investigators also spoke to the maintenance man, who gave them a little bit of interesting information as well. The maintenance man stated that the apartment had been emptied for a long time. And the maintenance man also told them that usually the doorknobs were changed once a tenant was evicted to basically prevent the old tenant from entering the unit without management knowing. So investigators, of course, wanted to know who was the renter of this particular apartment. However, the apartment complex did not keep good records, so trying to find that was kind of a long shot. However, the maintenance man was able to provide him a list of former tenants. When investigators presented the list of names to Tamika's family to try to see if any name jumped out at them, the family did not recognize any name on the list. However, one of Tamika's close friends did say that one of the names on the list looked familiar. The only name she knew him by, though, was Chris, and he was dating Tamika around the time that she disappeared. The friend wasn't sure of the last name. However, the only Chris name on the list was Christopher Hampton. Of course, a background check was done on Christopher Hampton as well. At the time, he was 23 years old. Christopher had a criminal history. He had served 4 years in prison for a bank robbery in May of 2000. He was also arrested recently for a traffic violation, in which he was due to serve 30 days. He violated his probation, so there was no trial to be had. Around the time of Tamika's disappearance, Chris was living in the Fremont School apartments. Around the time of Tamika's disappearance, investigators found something very interesting on Mr. Christopher Hampton. They found that he was not in jail around the time that Tamika disappeared, and also, interestingly enough, he had been evicted from the Fremont School apartment only a month after Tamika was reported missing. So, with this information, investigators wanted to talk to Mr. Christopher Hampton. So, they brought him in for questioning in June of 2004. He admitted to dating Tamika, but of course said he had nothing to do with her disappearance because the last he heard, she wanted to go down to Myrtle Beach for bike week. But he didn't know who she was supposed to be going with. He just knew that she was wanting to go to bike week and had asked him for money, and he gave her $150. When investigators tried to match the prints found in Tamika's car to Chris's prints, they did not come back as a match. So he was sent back to jail to finish serving his 30-day sentence, and he was released mid-July of 2004. Investigators at this point was fearing that their leads were drying up because it had been 3 months since Tamika disappeared and they were not any closer to knowing what happened to her. However, police received a tip later on that blew the case wide open. A young woman called the police with information regarding Tamika's case. She identified herself as Christopher Hampton's ex-wife, and she stated that she had evidence that the police just might be interested in looking into. She said that she had Christopher's wallet, which he mailed to her while he was serving his 30-day sentence. When she inspected it, there was a red stain on a photo that included her and their 2 daughters. She agreed to give the investigators the wallet if they came and got it from her. After investigators retrieved the wallet, they immediately sent it over to get processed. And the results on the stain that was found in the wallet came back as human blood. So the investigators contacted Tamika's parents for them to provide DNA samples so they could test the blood to see if it was Tamika's. After Tamika's mother and father sent in DNA samples, they tested it against the blood sample that was found in Chris's wallet, and it came back as a match to Tamika Huston. After this revelation, Chris was brought back in for further questioning to explain some things. He denied, as most dumbass criminals do, and he even tried to tell the investigators that the blood could be anyone's. How could it be Tamika's? That like the investigators were just new to this, not true to this. His interrogation was just laughable when he said that statement. Like, how delusional can you be? At this point, investigators knew that Christopher was not telling them the whole truth, and they knew that he was around Tamika when she was harmed enough to leave blood, but they couldn't prove that he was the one that caused Tamika to leave the blood that was found in his wallet. And without a body, this assumption and this case was just purely circumstantial. It was not airtight. In late 2004, a monumental tip came in that blew this case wide open. A woman called detectives, and she claimed to have dated Chris back in May of 2004, just a few months prior, and she had been inside of his apartment number 215, around the time that Tamika disappeared. And when she entered Chris's apartment, she made notice of several different oddities that was in his apartment. Like, for example, she noticed a large reddish brown stain in the middle of his bedroom carpet. And she also noticed that Chris had slid his dresser in front of his closet door. She said she didn't want to alert Chris to what she had took a mental note of, so they spent the night with each other, yes, having relations, and she left the next morning. She said she was scared of Chris's reaction if he knew that she was the one talking to investigators and told them this information. But what also makes this statement very alarming and even more weird is the fact that this woman is not a woman at all. She's a 15-year-old. However, the investigators did not reveal this information. They wanted to keep it secret so they could obtain a warrant to search that apartment to try to validate what this teenager was saying. So in July of 2005, they finally received their warrant to search Fremont School apartment number 215. When investigators entered the apartment, it was very obvious that someone had tried to do a major cleanup job. There was a particular spot on the carpet in the bedroom that had a huge bleach stain. So investigators pulled up the carpet, they pulled up the carpet in the entire home, and they found blood. They also sprayed luminol, and the room unfortunately lit up like a Christmas tree. Investigators also checked the closet, And upon investigating the closet, they also sprayed luminol, which revealed huge pools of blood. DNA testing, of course, was done on the blood, and since Tamika's parents had already gave DNA samples, it helped speed up the processing. And the results of that blood in the apartment came back as being a match to Tamika. However, there was no sign of Tamika's body being in the apartment. But this did not stop investigators from arresting Chris for the murder of Tamika on August 12, 2005. During Chris's interrogation, Chris had remained silent while the investigators laid out all of the evidence that they had against him. Once investigators were done, Chris just stood up and said he was ready to go. So the investigators asked him, "Where are we going?" And he said, "I'll take you to where her body is." So later that day, Chris led them to a heavily wooded area about 12 miles away from the city, and he showed the investigators the shallow grave that he dug for Tamika and buried her in. He knew it was this exact spot because he marked it with two long tree branches in the shape of a cross. Forensics teams excavated the grave and found skeletal remains. They sent the remains to a forensic anthropologist who confirmed that the remains were that of a woman's body. The whole skull was not intact, only a lower jaw, so they got the dental records for Tamika and compared them to the lower jaw bone that was found, and it was a match to Tamika. After they found Tamika's remains, Chris was taken back to the interrogation room where he finally confessed as to what happened to Tamika. Christopher claims on that fateful day that Tamika came to his apartment while he was getting ready to go out for the night and asked him for some money. He told Tamika no because he was saving up for a baby that he was having with another woman. And in turn, Tamika stated that you care about the baby more than you care about me, and they got into an argument. He claimed that in the heat of the argument, he took the hot iron that he was using to iron his clothes and threw it at Tamika, which hit her in the head and knocked her to the floor. He stated that after this happened, she started to bleed out on the carpet, so he took bed sheets and wrapped her body in the bed sheets and stuffed her into his closet. After he stuffed her body into his closet, he slid his dresser in front of it, just in case her body may have flew out of the closet. Then afterwards, he left, went out, brought back home the teenager that he was dealing with. They spent the night, had relations, literally mere feet, mere inches away from Tamika's dead body. He says that the very next day, he borrowed a friend's car and put Tamika's body in the trunk and drove around with her for a few hours trying to figure out what to do with her body. Once he disposed of Tamika's body in the wooded area that her remains were found in, he went back and got Tamika's car, and he drove her car to the Barksdale apartments, where it was found a couple of months later. However, this smart guy dropped his keys in the front passenger seat, helping lead to his arrest. While Chris was in jail awaiting trial, he decided to give some interviews. He claimed that Tamika's death was an accident and that he did not mean for this to happen. He said that he felt bad whenever her story circulated on the news. But of course, he wasn't feeling that bad to the point where he turned himself in voluntarily to tell them what happened. He also told investigators that a few months after he buried Tamika, he went back to the site to dig her up and then turn himself into the police. But he got cold feet. He then took her skull and threw it into the dumpster. Investigators feel like this was an attempt to conceal her identity and throw them off. While Chris was out here giving interviews, prosecutors started to prepare their case against him. And at his arraignment, he decided to plead not guilty. And so, trial was set for April 2006. On April 3rd, 2006, Chris's trial began. But at the beginning of the trial, he shocked everyone by changing his plea to guilty. His defense team tried to get the court to see his changing of his plea as an act of remorse and asked that he be sentenced to the maximum 40 years in prison. Tamika's family, of course, was present for the trial, and the judge allowed Tamika's mother, Gabriella, to address the court before the judge imposed their sentence. Gabriella stated that Chris put them through a tremendous suffering and that he deserved to spend the rest of his life in jail. After hearing Gabriella's testimony, the judge sentenced Christopher Hamden to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Tamika Huston. He remains behind bars at the Broad River Prison in South Carolina. But the story doesn't stop there. Even in jail, this guy is a damn problem. He's been breaking rules left and right, and even to the point where he has some privileges taken away. But enough about him. Again, this story is about Tamika. Inspired by Tamika's story, two sisters, Derica and Natalie Wilson, founded the Black and Missing Foundation in 2006. This foundation is aimed to bring coverage and attention to missing people of color. Fast forward to the year of 2022, a podcast on Audible called Finding Tamika was released. And this podcast detailed the life, her disappearance, and her subsequent murder. It put emphasis on Tamika's impact of the missing white woman syndrome, and it highlights how Black women or women of color are often overlooked in missing persons cases. Rebecca Howard was also a co-producer for the podcast Finding Tamika, and she is on the board of directors for the Black and Missing Foundation. I wasn't able to find any updates on any of the rest of Tamika's family. There is some unfortunate news that in 2017, Tamika's father, Anthony Huston, and his wife were both killed in what police believed was a murder-suicide. Anthony Huston had what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and his wife, Joanne Brown Houston, unfortunately died from her injuries a few days after the incident. But that is it for today's story. I didn't want to end it on a tragic note, but the person that I do want to give the utmost kudos to is Rebecca Howard. As I said, she was a beast, and she did not stop until her niece received justice, because she was right. The missing white woman syndrome. We knew everything about Natalee Holloway. We knew everything about Laci Peterson and Lori Hacking. There were literally updates almost overnight. But when it came to Tamika, no one wanted to report on it. And it's just very, very frustrating as a woman of color to know that our stories are not believed. Doesn't matter that Tamika was a spontaneous person. If her family states that she went missing, she went missing. Tamika's case was also featured in an episode of Forensic Files, which is how I initially was introduced to her case. From what I could find on Tamika, and even listening to the podcast myself, it was beautifully done. Again, it's available on Audible if you want to take a listen to it. It is narrated by Erica Alexander, where if you know her, she is basically Maxine Shaw, attorney at law on Living Single. If you know, you know. But it was absolutely a wonderful podcast. It gives so much insight into Tamika. Again, she was a real person. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was a beautiful young woman. Did not deserve to be judged based on the men that she dealt with, because of course, don't deal with dirty somebody's dusty son. She was not a woman that deserved to be murdered. I do not think Christopher is telling the whole truth about what happened, because an iron shouldn't even be it isn't thrown hard enough to basically crack someone's skull. I agree with investigators. When you listen to the podcast, I agree that he disposed of her skull to actually hide how severe her head injuries were, because when you look at that large stain of blood left in the bedroom, that's just not from no throw of a iron. I think he beat Tamika with the iron. So it did some very, very bad damage to her skull, and he did not want that to be revealed. Though Chris is delusional, he's insane, and he deserves to be exactly where he is. Like, how the hell are you a problem even in jail? But yeah, that'll do it for this story. This is how the candle turned out. It's a white candle with a little rose bouquet. Just simple. Smells like roses. So if you like roses, you know, this would be the perfect candle for those. But let me know your thoughts on this video down below. What do you think happened? Because again, Chris seems like he's a very delusional individual, and he's very problematic. So you can't really trust what a problematic individual says. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.